welcome you to another of our Institute Encounters. On this occasion, we're featuring a very special guest, Terry Teachout, who is, among many other things, the drama critic for the Wall Street Journal. In addition to that, he is a playwright and an author. His first play, Satchmo at the Waldorf, opened last year to rave reviews and is now being done around the country. So he is a fellow who has seen the stage from both sides. He's also the author of a biography of Louis Armstrong and of Duke Ellington.
Yes.
So, welcome. And,
Thanks for having me.
Well, our pleasure. Let me start off by asking, you can imagine a kid growing up, many do, who wants to be an actor. And you can imagine a kid growing up, smaller number probably, who would like to be a playwright. I don't suppose, but maybe I'm wrong,
I see this
that there are a
coming.
lot of kids out there who start off wanting to be critics.
And if there were, you wouldn't want to play with them.
You might not want to be their parent. But what set you on the course to be a drama critic?
Well, I didn't grow up wanting to do that, or to be a playwright, or to be an actor. I started out as a musician. And I got interested in writing, and I was writing through high school. I edited the high school newspaper. I didn't think of myself as becoming a writer because I came from a very small town where there were really no role models for being a writer. I had a professor in college in the music department who suggested to me that since I could write and did have a passion for music, that I might want to try writing about music. And the thought simply hadn't occurred to me. He was right on the money. Within a year of his making this suggestion, I had done an independent study with the man who was then the music critic of the Kansas City Star. And when he died and his assistant replaced him, I replaced his assistant while I was still an undergraduate. And that was the beginning of my career as a critic. But no, I did not contemplate being a critic at the age of 10.
Now, you were a jazz musician, a bassist.
Well, I played all kinds of music. I ended up mostly playing jazz, but my first experiences as a musician were that I studied violin in elementary school and thought for about 10 minutes that I would become a concert violinist. And I found that my own interests in music were much more wide-ranging just than classical music. So I taught myself other instruments so that I could play other kinds of music. And I ended up being mostly a jazz musician, but I always played all kinds of music, and to this day still listen to all kinds of music.
What are the occupational hazards of being a critic?
Seeing too many mediocre performances. The bad ones don't blunt you because they're really interesting to write about. And the language of invective is more varied than the language of praise, which is why it's easier to write a bad review than a good review. But a mediocre performance, you really just can't get your hands on it. There's nothing to say other than and it doesn't make for a very stimulating review. And when I first started out reviewing concerts, I was the second string classical guy in Kansas City. So I got all the pretty good concerts, and that was a real challenge. What I discovered, of course, very quickly, was that you write about the music, not the performance, because no matter how mediocre the performance of Beethoven 5 is, it's still Beethoven 5, and there's still something new to say about it.
You can't surprise many readers, though, by acclaiming the genius of Beethoven 5.
No, but that's the challenge, to try to find in the piece and in yourself new ways of talking about it, new ways of hearing it. And that's, in a sense, the challenge for all critics in all fields, and most particularly, I think, for drama critics. We spend a lot of time writing about Shakespeare. I counted it up. I had occasion to last year. I've been the Journal's drama critic for 13 years, and I reviewed 16 productions of King Lear. And I find it completely inexhaustible, partly because, of course, every production is different from the one before. But these plays all of his plays are self-renewing. The more you look into them, the more you see in them. And that's part of the excitement of being a critic, is that if you're working in a field where there is a large body of classics, and theater is that, you get to engage and re-engage with these great works of art. You will never say the last word about King Lear, or the Cherry Orchard, or the Glass Menagerie. It will always be bigger than you are.
So you don't find any difficulty in continuing to kind of mine
No.
works like that? They're inexhaustible in some sense?
And my response to them is always fresh.
Are they renewing as a critic?
They are self-renewing.
I mean, do you feel kind of strengthened in your sensibilities as a critic for having seen these performances?
Well, I just know them better.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you're talking about a great work of art, not just a piece of entertainment, but a great work of art, you can't get to the bottom of it. So every time you see a new director and a new set of performers and a new set of designers try to lift the piece off the page and put it on the stage, it's renewing itself in that way alone, entirely aside from its substance.
So you're also, just to kind of digress a little bit here, you're also now going to be a director.
Yes, I am. My play, Satchmo at the Waldorf, has already been done off-Broadway and from coast to coast. I am going to direct a production of it next May at Palm Beach Drama Works in West Palm Beach, Florida. I directed a workshop performance of the first half of the play back in 2011, but that was not a fully professional production. This will be my professional debut as a theater director.
So if you were preparing yourself to direct Lear, how would you go about the process of thinking through a strategy for directing Lear?
Well, obviously different people approach this in completely different ways. I think visually, both as a playwright, and I expect I will think visually as a director as well. I've now written one play and 3 operas opera libretti that have all been produced. And in every case, the way the process started was after a lot of preliminary thought. Suddenly, the stage picture came to me. What does the stage look like at rise? That's what we say when the curtain first goes up or the lights go up. And once I saw it, I heard the first thing that the actor said. And suddenly I was off and running. So my guess would be, if I were staging Lear, having thought a lot about it, having reviewed 16 productions of it, I wouldn't be sitting down and saying to myself, you know, what do I think the meaning of King Lear is? I already have a feeling about what I think the meaning of King Lear is. I would wait for the lights to go on in my head and for me to imagine where we are at rise. And then I would work outward from there. And then, of course, the next thing that happens is casting. It's an axiom in the theater, and it's absolutely true. 2/3 of good directing is casting. The person you pick, if you're a good director and not the kind who wants to paste an interpretation on the director, is going to come from out of the performer, and you will help them shape it. That's what good directing is. But you're the one who picks them. Generally, you're not presented with a precast production and asked to deal with it from there.
So it's a little bit like being a kind of field marshal and wanting to have talented generals, sort of on the various fronts,
That's exactly
improvising
right.
their own.
And remembering, well, I mean, if you want to extend this metaphor, the director is delegating the task of acting to the actor, and a good manager really does delegate. He understands that everything that you can leave to the person you picked, you ought to leave to them. Theater is a profoundly, radically collaborative art. If you are the sort of person who must control every element of the work of art, do not get involved in theater, because it doesn't work that way. It's just like film. You really can't put your finger on who the auteur is. And if, conversely, it excites you to work in collaboration with other people, then it's exactly the right medium for you, because then you will pool your ideas with the actor's ideas and the set designer's ideas and all the other people in the process. And something will come out, hopefully, that is bigger than any one of you could have done.
So coming back to this hypothetical Lear, would you have a kind of idea of where you thought, you see the curtain up, you see some sense of where the play is going, and then you start picking the actors based on that sense? Or do you think it's more likely you go out there and find a very talented actor and having some
Well,
general conception, you see where he takes
With
it?
Lear, you're talking about a play that is considered the summit of a great actor's
So
career.
it's going to revolve around.
Right,
wherever
it's
you cast as
something
Lear.
that he does
Mhm.
toward the end of the game.
Mhm.
So you're going to want to be looking for an older actor who has the weight, whose stage persona is in the ballpark of how you imagine the play as being. You're going to be making some preliminary decisions, especially with Shakespeare in the modern age. The first thing you're going to say is, when is the production taking place? Is this a modern dress Lear? Is it a conceptual Lear in which the whole play it emerges from a decision about its a governing conceptual idea? Part of what I love about theater is that it's a completely empirical art form. It does not have rules. So you start from scratch every time, and you say, okay, what will we do this time? And if I were lucky enough to direct Lear twice in my life, I would hope that the two productions would be totally different. Because, after all, they're both about Shakespeare. And nothing I do to it can be as great as what it is in and of itself. But there's no platonic essence toward which all the productions are striving. There is no Lear that is the correct way to do Lear. That is in the nature of the interpretative arts. There is no one way to do them. There are creative artists who think there is. Stravinsky was that way. He thought that you should do his pieces exactly as they were written on the page, and he made records of them so you could see what he thought. Well, the trouble is, Stravinsky recorded some of his pieces more than once, and the interpretations changed. There is no possible way to do plays like that. I mean, there are plays that are more down the center than others, and a play that is clearly conceived as a naturalistic play, what in theater is called a kitchen sink drama, because the set usually has a working kitchen sink in it. August Wilson's plays are like that. They are almost always staged in a very naturalistic style. But I am dying to see a Wilson play that has an abstract setting, that gets away from these down and dirty ghetto sets. I once saw a wonderful production of an August Wilson play, and there was a working kitchen, and you could actually smell them making coffee in the theater. Okay, that's great. I loved that. I love hypernaturalism, but I would also like to see the other thing.
So there's a sense in which, whether we call it this or not, all theater is sort of improvisational.
Yes, that's exactly right. And it's different every night. This is part of the magic of theater, is that it's evanescent. Once you've seen it, even if you come back tomorrow, it's going to be different. The differences may be subtle. The performances may evolve quite considerably over the period of performance. But once it closes, it's gone.
You generally come back to a performance you like several times?
I don't have the luxury, unfortunately, because I have too many shows to see. I try to when I can. I'll tell you one thing that I do. I am the only drama critic in America who routinely covers productions all over the country. And so when I've seen a new play in New York on Broadway, if it's successful, and I like it, and it gets taken up by regional theater companies elsewhere, after a season or two, I'll go out and see it being done somewhere else. And I learn more about the play, because when you first see a new play, you really can't tell the difference between the play and the production, between the play and the performance. They're completely confounded. They come to you in a single signal, so to speak. And then when you come back and see it the second time, it's different. And you can start to see what's the play and what's the production. And sometimes I have seen some plays where I saw the original cast, the people for whom the play was written. And then I'll see a regional production in Chicago or San Francisco or someplace, and it'll be better. I like that too. I like the surprise.
So to come back to your role as a critic, you come into the theater, it's opening night. How have you prepped yourself?
More often than not, I haven't prepped myself at all, other than having gone to the theater for 13 years as a drama critic. I don't read the script in advance. I don't want to. I want to see what the audience sees, the way that they're seeing it. I want the play to come to me as it comes to them. So, ideally, although I can't always hold to this, I may not even look at the program. I may not even know who designed the set, for example. And once in a while, I hold to that and I'm quite surprised by who's involved with the production. But after it's over, then I, so to speak, look at the program and look at the script and start bringing that contextual knowledge to what I'm going to report about the experience of seeing the show. But as far as advanced preparation, nothing, really. I don't want it.
And what are you doing as the play unfolds?
Well, to use a piece of theater talk, I want to be present. I want to be suspended in the moment. I want to be experiencing the play completely. And of course, I'm thinking about what I'm going to write. You can't help that. I've been reviewing performances for so long that sentences form in my head. But insofar as possible, I don't want them to get in the way of experiencing what is happening and my receiving it and being able thus to describe it. At some point along the way, I begin to get a sense of how I feel about what I'm seeing. Moss Hart wrote plays with George S. Kaufman. He used to say that every audience gives every play 15 minutes at the top. They're completely receptive, they're prepared to have a good time, and at the end of the 15th minute you can hear the door close. And they're either going to be on board or not on board. And if they're not on board, that's when this coughing starts. Very rarely, no more than once or twice in these 13 years, have I changed my feelings about a play after the intermission.
Can you remember some of the cases?
Yeah, Martin McDonagh's The Pillman. At the intermission, I thought, what a mess. And at the end of the evening, I thought, I was so wrong.
And what changed it in the second act?
Well, he clinched it. I mean, he let us realize what the play was really about. I don't want to talk more specifically about it than that for people who haven't seen it, but...
so that can be done. I guess that's a risky...
It's a very
strategy.
risky thing, and you don't want to rely on the ability to do that. But as a general rule, after about 15 minutes or so, I know what's happening, and I know what I'm likely to think of it, and everything else is just refining the initial judgment. But you know pretty quickly. You know pretty quickly. And at that point, the phrases start piling up. I do take notes. I don't usually consult them because I'm left-handed and I'm writing in the dark and I can't read them anyway. But somehow the act of scribbling phrases down helps set things in my head. And at some point in the evening, the first sentence of the review comes to me. And then I know I'm home free. I know what's going to happen.
It's a little bit like your notion of how you direct a play.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Everything pulls together. And once I've got that first sentence, the lead is what journalists call that, I know I'm not going to have any trouble writing about the play. It's very, very unusual for me to not be clear about what I thought about a play once it's over. Every once in a while, you see a play about which you have very sharply mixed feelings, and then your job as a critic is to communicate those. I felt this about The History Boys. I thought, this play doesn't quite add up. And that was actually one of the plays that I saw a regional production of it the following year in Chicago. I saw the original cast, the one that Alan Bennett had written it for, came over from England and did it. And I thought the play was very interesting, also very glib, that it was a glib play about the dangers of glibness. I think I actually used that sentence in the Wall Street Journal. And then the following year, I went to see it revived at Timeline Theater in Chicago, one of the country's best regional theaters, because I had these mixed feelings and I wanted to see what they did with it. And I didn't have them the second time. They did it better. They nailed it. So this is one of the advantages of covering regional theaters I do, is that you get a second chance to think about complex works of art.
I suppose at least subliminally you're aware of how the rest of the audience is responding.
Well, you
Is
should
that
be
a-
more than subliminally aware of it. I mean, a critic is a reporter. And if how you feel about what you are seeing is sharply different from how the audience feels, that doesn't mean you're wrong. But it's something that you should at least be reporting, that they liked it, or they loved it, or they hated it. Because the fact that you disagree with them is interesting. It may cut to the heart of the matter. I mean, you may feel that they're not getting it, or that something is interfering with the correct
So there have
response.
been reviews in which you've rendered the audience's judgment as well as your own.
Well, I've at least passed it on and said, you know, I don't think this is quite right. I have used the phrase, I actually started a review once with, "This is a minority report." And I think that that's part of the job too, because at bottom, if you are a newspaper theater reviewer, what you are providing first of all is consumer advice. It costs a lot of money to buy a ticket to a play on Broadway. It costs $299 for the top ticket to the Book of Mormon on Broadway. If you're buying 2 tickets, having dinner, and hiring a babysitter, that's a fairly serious capital investment. So I don't want to write ambiguous reviews. I want to write reviews that, insofar as possible, tell the reader, here's what the experience is like. Max Beerbohm said that the universal review would say, if this is the sort of thing you like, you will like this thing. And I want to convey enough information to get that across, but also, when necessary, to say, but that's wrong. The way that the people in the house responded to the play, generally they overrate it. Very few shows don't get a standing ovation in New York anymore. Again, it's because you're paying so much money. It's confirmation bias. You're paying so much money for the experience that you want to like it.
I can't remember in all my theater going, which probably effectively ceased sometime around 1970, anybody getting a standing ovation.
It's a new thing. Well, not brand new, but I mean, since I've been covering for the Journal, standing ovations at New York previews have become near universal.
Do you look around and see whether your fellow critics are standing? Do you stand?
Generally to put my coat on. But I don't try to be ostentatious about it. If I don't like the play, I'm not going to sit on my hands. And, I mean, you're clapping for somebody. You're clapping for the actors. Usually, in any given theatrical production, the actors are the most professional thing about it. The failing is more likely to be with the playwright, or just as often with the director. The actors are the real pros, and of course the backstage people. The person who should be taking a call is the stage manager. They're the ones who make the trains run on time. But I don't sit on my hands, just in the same way that I wouldn't stalk up the aisle midway through the second act, as if to say, oh, this stinks. Somebody told me once, early in my time as a critic, never show your back to the actors. And I thought, that is a really good piece of etiquette. I do not leave the theater until after the last curtain call.
One of the things I like about the direct broadcast of the Metropolitan Opera is that they make the stage people, to some degree, the stars.
I like
go back
that.
and see what they do.
I like that.
You've recently become a playwright.
I have.
And did anything surprise you about the experience?
Not really, because for one thing, I had written the operas beforehand, and I had done quite a lot of theater in high school and college. So I wasn't taken by surprise by the totality of the experience. I think I was surprised by how much fun it was. I knew that theater is a collaborative art, but nothing prepares you for just how deep that runs. I think the biggest surprise was that when I read Moss Hart's Act 1, that's his autobiography, it ends with the night of his first success on Broadway. It's the greatest theatrical autobiography written, and it really talks about the process of rewriting a show in previews. And they're talking about a play, Once in a Lifetime, that opened in 1930. And I didn't know that nothing had changed until we got into rehearsals. And suddenly I wrote a new character into this play. I mean, I was doing work in the rehearsal period, and I remember thinking to myself, my God, it's just like Act 1. That was a bit of a surprise.
Now, your play is Satchmo at the Waldorf,
Yes.
and that's a kind of what, a study of Louis Armstrong,
Yeah.
sort of at the end point of his life.
Right. It's a one-actor, three-character play. There are other plays like that, obviously, but they're comparatively unusual, where the actor switches roles right in the middle of the performance, right before your eyes. He switches between Armstrong and Joe Glazer, who was Armstrong's Jewish manager. And then in a smaller role, he also plays Miles Davis, which is it's a tour de force, obviously. It's a real challenge for any actor. And it's not a musical. You don't have Louis up on stage, smiling the big smile and singing and playing his greatest hits. It is a drama about the tension between Armstrong and his manager, and about what had happened to Armstrong and his black audience toward the end of his life. Armstrong came to be seen as a kind of Uncle Tom in the last 20 years of his life.
By other musicians?
By many older blacks. Well, by a younger generation of blacks is actually what I should be saying. They're older now. Black people who remember Armstrong are people who were younger when he was still performing. And he had the ingratiating platform manner of a man who had been born in 1901. And they found it hard to come to terms with. So by the end of Armstrong's life, his audiences were primarily white, and he was deeply disturbed by this. He couldn't come to terms with having lost that audience. And
was he aware of why he was losing the audience?
he was, and he thought it was a complete injustice to him, and he was right. Armstrong was no kind of Uncle Tom, not on any level. And he had a very complex psychological relationship with Glazer, his manager, whom he saw as a father figure. Armstrong was deserted by his father as a baby.
Was Glazer his manager throughout his career?
No, he started working, he knew Glazer from the late 20s on. Glazer worked for Al Capone and managed the clubs that Armstrong performed in Chicago in the late 20s. But then he set up his own management firm, and Armstrong came to him in 1934, and Glazer shaped his career after that. And Glazer was to a considerable degree responsible for making Armstrong more than just a jazz artist, but a world culture figure, somebody who was universally known and universally loved. But Armstrong paid a price for this, a price for becoming a popular culture figure, which is that he pulled away from some of his jazz roots. I mean, he was never anything other than Louis Armstrong, but he was seen as no longer being pure, if you catch my drift. So those are some of the ideas that the play is rooted in. But essentially, it's Gordon Edelstein, who directed it, said what it is a love story. It's a story about love and betrayal between a man and his father figure, who the man comes to feel at the end of his own life that the father figure has betrayed him. So most one-person plays don't work like this. Most one-person plays about a famous historical figure are occasions to celebrate, where we all get together and this actor comes out on stage and he's pretending to be Clarence Darrow or Harry Truman, and he's a great guy, and he spends 90 minutes telling you what a great guy he was and what great things he did. And there's no conflict built into them, and they're dramatically dead for this reason. They may be an opportunity for an actor to give an incredible virtuoso performance, the way that James Whitmore did in Give 'Em Hell, Harry. But conflict is the life of theater. It's what propels theater through time.
So there are less dramas than they are very engaging impersonations.
Yes, that's exactly what they are, and I didn't want that. I wanted to write a real play that was conflict-driven about Louis Armstrong and his life. And I think that that's what I've done. I mean, at least I was conscious of the fact that this was what I wanted to do.
Louis Armstrong remains a kind of icon. Have many people who have seen the play react to this particular portrayal of his anguish toward the end of his life?
Yes, I mean, there are some Armstrong buffs, you might say. I mean, the play takes liberties with historical fact. It is, I describe on the title page, a work of fiction freely based on fact. And some Armstrong people are disquieted by that. I think people who are not primarily interested in theater and are bothered because he's using the wrong mouthpiece, so to speak. But a goodly number of people who knew Armstrong have seen the play. And without exception, they've told me that I nailed it, that I really had the personality.
Now, you had an opportunity here with access to a vast library
Right.
of tapes,
Right.
off-the-record tapes that Armstrong. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Armstrong was one of the very first people in America to own a tape recorder. He bought his first tape recorder in 1947. You know, the technology had been developed in Nazi Germany and had been brought over here after the war. Bing Crosby seized on it immediately because he wanted to tape his radio shows for later broadcast. So Armstrong bought an early tape recorder so that he could tape his shows and listen to them. Often people don't understand that Louis Armstrong was a very self-aware artist. He taped his stage performances and listened to them and perfected them. But, of course, a tape recorder, especially for people of that generation, was also an amazing toy. So he started playing with his tape recorder, and between 1947 and his death in 1971, he amassed something like 600, I think it's 685 surviving reels of tape.
They last, each reel is about how long?
Now, he recorded them in slowest speed, so I guess a couple of hours each.
Say
And he
400 or
recorded both
500
sides too.
hours
Yeah,
worth
it's just a
of-
colossal
no.
amount of recording time. And they range, he taped his record library so he could take it on the road with him. So there's a lot of tapes that are just of records that Armstrong owned, including records of his own that he would play along with while he was taping, which are fascinating. But the historically interesting ones are him reminiscing, him having conversations. He would often start the tape recorder at a dinner party or in the corner of the dressing room and just let it run. And he saved these tapes too. So even though I never met Louis Armstrong, I have this fly-on-the-wall view of scenes from the second half of his life, and he was completely unself-conscious about this tape recorder.
Because you skipped out a good many quotes from the tapes.
Not in the play, because the play is, as I say, a work of fiction, but there are scenes that started, the seed for the scene was something that I heard on the tapes. Where I used the tapes extensively was in Pops, my biography of Armstrong, which came out in 2009, because I was the first Armstrong researcher to have access to the tapes after they were made available to researchers. They had been in the attic or the basement of the house, and it was initially thought that they couldn't be played, and they could all be played. They were digitally transferred, a finding aid was developed, and lucky me, I came along. So I had the benefit of that in writing my biography of him, and it was priceless. I would sit there in the Armstrong archives at Queens College in New York with headphones on, and I would hear these tapes, and I would just boggle at the fact that I was in the room with him. My favorite one of the tapes probably dates from the late 50s or early 60s. Somewhere out on the road, he's in a hotel room. He's got the tape recorder in the corner of the room running, and it's probably about 3 in the morning. He's after the gig. Lucille, his wife, is in the hotel room with him, and he's trying to get her to sleep with him. And she doesn't want to do this at 3 in the morning, so she's not having any of it. And he says, well, you got to, because that's what keeps the horn percolating. And then there's a pause. She's looking over in the corner of the room, and she says suddenly, Louis, you've got that tape recorder running. You turn that off. You erase that stuff. And Armstrong says right back to her, I can't do that. This is for posterity. So flash forward 20, 30 years. I'm sitting in the Armstrong archives with my white gloves and my headphones, listening to this tape, and I think to myself, oh my God, that's me.
He's dedicated
I am
to
posterity,
you. That's right.
and here I am.
So one of the first things you're saying, one of the first things a playwright needs to do, because this is obviously going to affect how the play develops, is to find the right person. And
Yes.
in this case was an absolutely pivotal decision, since it was a one-person play. How did you go about doing that?
Well, it was handed to me on a platter. I didn't write the play with an actor in mind. For the first production in Florida, an actor was found for me to do the workshop. His name was Dennis Neal. And he asked if he could do a commercial production of the play in Orlando. And he was a marvelous actor, and he did a great production. The play was, though not in a finished state, I had much more to do with it. During this time, it became known that I was writing a play up north, and two companies and their directors approached me and said, we would be interested in possibly doing the play. One of them was Shakespeare and Company of Lenox, Massachusetts, a very important summer festival. And they said to me, would you have any interest in having John Douglas Thompson play this part? John Douglas Thompson, for those of your readers who don't know, is the greatest classical actor of his generation. He's an extraordinary actor. Our great Othello, our great Richard III, he's just staggering. He'd never done any role like this. He's done relatively little modern theater. But I knew what he was because I'd reviewed him for years. And essentially I said, are you kidding me? Yes. What does he want? I'll write him a check. And John read the script and decided that he wanted to take on this challenge. And since then, he's performed the play in Lenox, in New Haven, Connecticut, in Philadelphia, off-Broadway in New York, and then this year he'll be doing it in San Francisco. He's done it in Los Angeles, and he'll be doing it in Colorado Springs.
So working with him, the play changes.
Yes.
And did it change in any unexpected ways with him in the one and only role?
Well, not shocking ways, but John, he's not the kind of actor who says, you got to change this. He doesn't think that way. He would really question me as to what a scene meant, what a line meant. He wanted to know what was in my head working on it. And sometimes he would suggest that maybe this might work. And I, in turn, was listening very closely to him, since he is a great actor, to see how lines came out of his mouth, and maybe I want to reshape them because of what he's doing with them. Sometimes he'd misremember a line, and his incorrect reading was better than the original, and I'd put it in the script right away.
Now, you weren't directing. There was a director.
No, Gordon Ellenstein was
so
directing.
there was a kind of three-way interaction.
Yes,
going on.
and there was never, at least I wasn't in the room, there was never an argument about it. Because we had talked a lot about the play before we started to work on it, and we were all very much on the same page. Jerome Robbins, the great choreographer and musical comedy director, used to say, when you're doing a musical, which is a collaboration, make sure everybody's writing the same show, because sometimes you get into rehearsal and realize that there are deep-seated variances of opinion on what the show is. And John and Gordon and I were all working on the same show, so there were not arguments. It doesn't mean that John's performance or Gordon's production was definitive. I don't believe there's such a thing. And when I direct it, it's going to look and sound very different from the way that we did it. But I was totally satisfied with what we did.
When will you be directing?
We open in mid-May. I've forgotten the exact day. I think it might be May 15th.
Where is this?
At Palm Beach Drama Works in West Palm Beach, Florida. It's one of the country's half-dozen best regional theaters. And they invited me. The artistic director, Bill Hayes, came up to see the show at Shakespeare and Company. And he said to me that he wanted to do it. And at this stage, we weren't licensing it for other productions, but he was persistent in wanting to do it. And then I think it was maybe last November, I was down in Florida, and I was in West Palm, and I was having lunch with Bill. And he smiled on me. He said, would you like to direct the show? And I took the deepest possible breath and said yes. I pretended to let him talk me into it, but I knew that I'd never get a better chance. There was a company I loved in a theater, a stage, a house, whose facilities I knew really well. I trusted everybody there, and I knew that I'd better say yes to this, so I did.
Who's going to be Satchmo?
We don't know yet. We're working on that right now.
There's going to be auditions?
Not what are called cattle call auditions. We are looking at resumes, we're looking at reels, meaning the online reels of clips of TV and movie performances by actors, things like that. And we're going to winnow that down to 3 or 4 people who seem plausible and approach them. And then at that point, yes, we will ask them to do some readings.
So what worlds in theater remain for you to conquer? You're not going to act, I take it.
No, Lord help the world if I did. Insane an ambition though it is, I'd like to work on a musical. One of my 3 operas with Paul Moravec is structured a bit like a musical. And I actually had to write lyrics for it, rhyming song lyrics for it. And I did, it worked, and I thought it might be interesting to write a musical. But most musicals don't go anywhere, and they're a recipe for grief if you get involved with them. So perhaps the powers that be will be merciful and prevent me from realizing this ambition. But on the other hand, remember this, I didn't want to be a playwright. I had no ambitions that way. I had no ambitions to be a director. These things have just fallen into my lap. Louis Pasteur said, chance favors the prepared mind. So if you're willing to seize opportunities when they come, then you should.
Well, it's nice to have an interview that ends with a moral lesson. Thank you so much.
We aim to please, and my pleasure entirely.